Have you ever been so blindsided by the people who are supposed to love you that it felt like your entire life flipped upside down in a single message? I did. I remember the day like it was yesterday. My phone buzzed while I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping on a coffee that had long gone cold. I unlocked it and read the text from my mom. "We are not funding this circus. Wedding is canceled. Figure it out yourself." At first, I thought it was a cruel joke. I blinked, reread it, and no, it was real. My parents, the people who had promised to be there for me for every milestone, had decided that my dream wedding was not worth their money, their time, or their attention. And they delivered that verdict through a text. I swear, man, you have no idea how it feels when someone you trusted, like a shield, suddenly becomes a weapon pointed straight at your chest. I sat there frozen, my mind racing through all the conversations. All the moments when I thought they were proud of me. I thought about my fiancé, Jake. He was calm, always the rock I leaned on, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, too. He did not say much, just reached across the table, held my hand and whispered, "We will figure this out together." And we did. But the path was anything but simple. The first challenge was reality. Our wedding plans were set. Venues booked, photographers, catering, the whole thing. Every appointment, every deposit, every detail suddenly became a problem. My parents had made it clear they were done supporting me. And the reason behind it? Their tone, their messages, their silence all hinted at something deeper, something more personal than just money. I had always suspected tension, but never expected betrayal of this scale. I remember calling my mom, trying to reason, pleading for at least a conversation. "Mom, we can adjust things, make it smaller, simpler," I said. Her voice, cold and clipped, responded, "No, you are an adult. You will manage. We are done. Done." It was like a slap. Like years of effort to be the daughter they wanted. The daughter they bragged about suddenly didn't matter. And in that moment, I realized that my revenge wouldn't be loud or explosive. It would be precise. It would sting the way betrayal stings, deep and long. The first step was gathering information. I started quietly. I didn't want them to know I was digging, because if they suspected, they would hide everything. I had learned over the years that my mom had a very particular way of controlling situations. She made herself seem generous, caring, supportive, and in reality, it was always about control. And my dad, he was the quiet enforcer, smiling, nodding, pretending to be on my side while secretly undermining every decision I made. I started with small things. Phone bills, statements, emails, anything that could show patterns, financial moves, anything hidden. It was tedious, painstaking work. But the more I dug, the clearer the picture became. My parents had been secretly siphoning funds, controlling my inheritance, and manipulating situations to ensure I stayed dependent. It was a game to them, a control they had wielded for decades. And finally, I could see the strings. I swear, that day changed everything in my mind. What I thought was love was manipulation. What I thought was support was a trap. Jake was my anchor. He didn't judge. He didn't push. He just helped. "We can do this your way," he said. And we started rebuilding piece by piece our plan to turn their betrayal into fuel. We were going to have the wedding. Not the way they wanted. Not the way they controlled, but our way. And that was step one, showing them that their control had limits, that their silence would not define my life. I started inviting my friends, my distant relatives, and even colleagues who I knew respected me and Jake. Every invitation, every decision was a quiet act of defiance. And it worked. The wedding started taking shape, not the glamorous, expensive affair my parents had envisioned controlling, but something real, honest, something we built with our hands and hearts. But they didn't see it coming. The texts started trickling in after that, subtle digs, passive-aggressive remarks, but I stayed calm. I had learned that reacting emotionally played into their hands. Silence, strategic calm, that was my weapon. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I planned, and planning gave me clarity. Every step I took, every decision I made, was mapped out to expose the hypocrisy, the control, the manipulation. 2 weeks before the wedding, the first public challenge came. My mom called, her voice sweet, almost innocent. "Honey, we would love to come, if it is not too late." I paused, calculating, weighing my words. I could say yes, I could forgive, I could pretend the past months didn't happen, but I had already envisioned the moment. "Mom, you are more than welcome to come," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But you will follow the plan we made, not what you want." There was a pause, a sharp inhale. "I suppose we can try," she said. But I knew the truth. She didn't realize she was already losing. The day of the wedding was surreal. Guests arrived, beautiful smiles, laughter, energy. And then the moment came. My mom and dad walked in, perfectly poised, acting like everything was fine. But it wasn't. I could see it in their eyes. The subtle flickers of shock, disbelief, and frustration. They realized that they were no longer the directors of my life, the puppeteers of my choices. They had underestimated me. And at that moment, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Jake and I exchanged vows, our friends cheered, and I glanced at my parents. Their expressions were a mixture of defeat and disbelief. I didn't gloat, I didn't shout, I just smiled. That day wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about reclaiming control. It was about showing them that betrayal and manipulation cannot define your destiny. That silence, patience, and strategic planning can be stronger than anger, confrontation, or yelling. The aftermath was inevitable. My parents tried to intervene, to negotiate, to control, but the groundwork was done. Our wedding was a success, not because of them, not because of their money or approval, but because we built it, fought for it, and carried it through with honesty, love, and quiet strength. And in the weeks that followed, the power dynamics shifted. I was no longer a dependent, no longer someone they could manipulate. I had exposed, without words, the limitations of their control. In hindsight, that experience taught me more than anger or resentment ever could. It taught me strategy, patience, and the importance of self-respect. I realized that revenge doesn't always have to be loud, doesn't have to be destructive. Sometimes it's about proving, in the quietest and most personal way, that you are stronger than the forces trying to break you. That day, as I danced with Jake under the dim lights of our small but perfect reception, I felt it. Freedom, empowerment, and yes, the satisfaction of finally being seen, truly seen for the woman I had become, not the puppet they wanted me to be. After the wedding, life should have felt lighter, simpler, even joyous. But the truth was, the storm had only just begun. My parents, humiliated by how things had turned out, were not willing to silently accept defeat. Their messages became more frequent, their tone sharper, more cutting. I started receiving texts filled with veiled threats, questions dripping with judgment, and passive-aggressive comments that were meant to destabilize me. They wanted me to feel guilt, to regret taking control, to crave their approval again. But I did not. Not anymore. I had tasted independence, and it was intoxicating. Jake noticed the change immediately. He was calm as always, but I could see his concern. "Do you want me to block them?" he asked, watching me scroll through another round of insults and accusations. I shook my head. "No, let them talk. I am done reacting. They need to see that words don't control me anymore," I replied, and I meant it. My revenge was no longer about proving something in front of others. It was about reclaiming peace on my own terms, dismantling their influence over my life quietly but completely. The first strategic step was finances. My parents had always flaunted control through money. They were the ones who paid for everything, always reminding me of my place in the hierarchy. But now I had the upper hand. Years of hard work, small savings, careful investments, they all became my shield. I started redirecting the money they thought they still controlled into accounts they couldn't touch. Every transaction, every payment, every surprise gift I bought myself was a silent act of defiance. It was small at first, almost imperceptible, but each day it built momentum. Then came the subtle exposure. I began reconnecting with extended family members who had always been told half-truths about me, misled by my parents' version of events. Slowly, discreetly, I shared the reality of their manipulation. I showed them evidence, receipts, emails, small proofs that my parents were not the caring, selfless figures they pretended to be. Reactions varied: shock, disbelief, some anger, but the underlying effect was the same. My parents' reputation was no longer untouchable. They had built a fortress of control, and I was quietly dismantling it, brick by brick. Meanwhile, my parents tried every trick in the book to regain control. They showed up unexpectedly at my home, forgot important dates, invited themselves to events, trying to guilt me into submission. Each encounter felt like walking a tightrope, balancing politeness with assertion. I learned quickly that anger was useless. It fueled them. Calm precision, subtle boundaries, and clear communication became my weapons. When they stormed in one morning, shouting about how ungrateful I was, I calmly led them to the door, saying, "Mom, Dad, I love you. But this conversation is over until it can be respectful." I swear, man, the look on their faces was priceless, a mix of disbelief and frustration. They had expected me to crumble. I did not. At the same time, I had to handle Jake's family, who were understandably cautious. They had seen enough family drama in their own lives, and though they supported us, they worried about the emotional toll. I reassured them, promised that while my parents' behavior was toxic, it would not touch our life together. And in doing so, I realized that my revenge was not about proving a point through anger, but about building a life so strong, so fulfilling, that their interference became irrelevant. The next stage involved social leverage. I had always been careful with social media, but now I used it strategically. Posts of our life, our adventures, our accomplishments. They were subtle reminders that I was thriving despite my parents' efforts to control me. I did not need to confront them publicly. The mere fact that they were excluded from this narrative was punishment enough. Friends reached out, congratulated us, admired our resilience, and slowly, the narrative shifted. I was no longer the dependent child they could manipulate. I was an independent, capable woman who had outmaneuvered their control, without stooping to their level. But the most satisfying part, the one I had been waiting for, came months later. My parents, desperate to reclaim their sense of power, tried to interfere in an investment I had made, one I knew would fail without their understanding, one I had designed to expose their ignorance. I feigned ignorance, let them believe their input could matter, and watched as their efforts collapsed. They had underestimated me, assumed I was naive and helpless, and now the consequences of their arrogance were undeniable. It was subtle, silent, but devastating. I remember sitting one evening with Jake, recounting the day's events, laughing quietly over the irony. "Can you believe they thought they still controlled this?" I asked. He shook his head, smiling. "You handled it perfectly. They never saw it coming. And that was the beauty of it. The revenge was complete without confrontation, without drama, without the need to escalate. It was clever, precise, and deeply satisfying. Of course, there were moments of doubt, loneliness, reflection, wondering if I had gone too far, if I had become too consumed by the strategy. But those moments were fleeting. Every time I looked at our home, the laughter, the warmth, the stability we had built, I remembered why I did this. Revenge was not about cruelty. It was about reclaiming dignity, autonomy, and peace. And in doing so, I had created a fortress my parents could not breach. The years that followed only reinforced the lessons. My parents remained in my life, but their influence waned. They tried subtle manipulations, snide comments, and veiled critiques, but they no longer had the leverage. Jake and I continued to grow, building our careers, our family, and our home without interference. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the control they once wielded over me was gone, irretrievably gone, was a comfort that no words can capture. I often think back to that first text. "We are not funding this circus. Wedding is canceled. Figure it out yourself." At the time, it felt like the end, like the world had shifted beneath my feet. But in retrospect, it was the catalyst, the spark that ignited a fire I didn't know I had. It forced me to confront the manipulation, the subtle betrayals, and the emotional control that had shaped my life. And in confronting it, I discovered my own strength. Looking back, I realize revenge is not always about confrontation, shouting or making someone suffer. Sometimes it is about subtlety, strategy, and self-empowerment. It is about building a life so resilient, so full of dignity and joy, that those who sought to control you become irrelevant. That is the lesson I want anyone listening to remember. Power is not in intimidation. Power is in control over yourself, your choices, and your destiny. And so, as I sit here today, reflecting on everything that happened, I feel no anger, no need for validation. I feel peace, satisfaction, and a quiet triumph. I reclaimed my life, my wedding, my family dynamics, and my autonomy without stooping to the bitterness or cruelty that my parents thrived on. And that, I think, is the most satisfying revenge of all.